Okay, everyone, good afternoon. I hope you're enjoying your day and hope you enjoyed your lunch. You'll be pleased to know that there is no, in this short presentation, I will not be selling you any software, so you can relax. That's me, I'm Walter Macharg, I'm Head of Change Control at Crossrail. I've been with Crossrail since 2009, which was when the main construction started. I have to admit I'm an accountant, and I escaped, before escaping into program controls, I was the financial controller for Crossrail, and before that I was financial controller for various parts of Network Rail, and before that I worked for something called Railtrack. I don't know if anybody remembers that. So, Crossrail. Despite this being the mega project zone, it's a bit of a minor room. I hope you can see these slides. They're a little bit lower down than I was expecting them to be. But this is Crossrail in 4 numbers. A 10% increase in London's rail capacity, bringing an extra 1.5 million people within 45 minutes of the centre of London. 100 kilometres of railway, of which 42 is completely new tunnel through the middle of London. 40 stations, of which 10 are new stations, and of those 8 or 9 are new underground stations. And it's supporting regeneration across the capital with a net benefit to the economy, as calculated by the transport economists, of £42 billion. So that's Crossrail route. You'd expect an accountant to be interested in the money, and this is where your money comes from, via the DfT and Transport for London, who are the 2 major sponsors. So this is all about governance and controls over public money, your money. And you can see at the top of the slide there, that, as I say, the 2 joint public sector sponsors, the DfT and TfL, a sponsors agreement with them. So this is at a top level for formal governance of Crossrail. Sponsors agreement between the 2 sponsors. The JST is a joint sponsor team, and the PREP are a set of consultants that work with them. They manage the relationship between the Crossrail project and our sponsors. Those formal agreements set out how any changes imposed by the sponsors are managed. There haven't been very many of them, but those that we have had have been controlled through these processes. In the middle of the slide there, you have the Crossrail delivery organisation, the project partner, the executive team, and the operator, Rail for London. It's an integrated organisation. There's one organisation structure. There's people like me that work for Crossrail. There are consultants that work for the project partners. There are people who work for the operator, integrated in one organisation structure. So that's the money. The next slide is quite exciting. This is about the scale and complexity of Crossrail. That's Finsbury Circus in the city. I recognise that. It's just down the railway tracks. That's what exists underneath Finsbury Circus at the moment. There's the circle line, the central line, the northern line coming in there. What we describe as First Capital Connect is now Govia. And finally, I think we will see, yes, the little post office railway. Doesn't work anymore. There was a documentary about that the other night. Now then, I think you have to press a button to make the next thing happen. It's very audiovisual, this. There we go. So that's the Crossrail infrastructure underneath Moorgate and Liverpool Street, the ticket halls at either end, and the 2 tunnels in between. So it gives you an idea of the scale of what's happening under central London. That's one of the 8 central London stations. Okay. If you press that, the slide might go away. Let's try again. I think so. What happens now is it goes back so you can see what it looks like from the top. There we go. Finsbury Circus back again. It isn't green anymore. It's got lots of construction porter cabins on it. We need to move those off before we finish. Let's try and move on to the next slide. Okay, there we go. So the plug normally comes at the end of the presentation. This plug is at the beginning. This is the Crossrail Learning Legacy website. Now, most of what I'm going to talk about today is on that website. It's worth a look. It was established following the lead of London 2012 and building on practice, the good practice established by that project. Do have a look at the site. Do drop emails to that email address, which is on there. The site is organised into 12 themes. That's the themes of the site. There's a taxonomy on the site which will help you search for things you are interested in. And this presentation today is under the heading of Project and Programme Management, and there's quite a lot on there on programme controls, which I would urge you to have, not urge you, but encourage you to have a look at. Okay, so we're going to talk about governance this afternoon. Start by defining our terms. This is the OECD definition of corporate governance as quoted in Directing Change, the APM's manual guide to change management. So governance isn't just bureaucracy, it's not just a lot of meetings, it's not just a lot of process, it's about how an organisation's objectives are set, about how it achieves those objectives, and how you know you've achieved them afterwards. Also just quote section 1.1 of the APM body of knowledge, which says the application of good governance minimises the risk arising from change and maximises the benefits. So change is what I do in Crossrail. We're going to talk about governance, we're going to talk about change this afternoon. Governance is about decisions. Good governance enables effective decisions to be taken on time. So we need two things. We need a framework that hopefully produces the same answer if you put the same inputs in, a repeatable, reproducible framework. And it's about process, but it's also critically about people with the right skills supported by the right culture. Those of you who are familiar with Aubrey Daniels will know a bit about this model, the DCOM model. D for direction, C for competence, O for opportunity, and M for motivation. Teams that have all those are high-performing teams. Teams without direction will be chaotic teams, and good governance is all about good direction. Not making a decision is worse than making the wrong decision, because you can always change the wrong decision. So direction is the D, the C is competence. Without competence you get failure, without opportunity you get frustration, without motivation you get lethargy. So saying again, good governance is all about good direction. Okay, so a little bit about the Crossrail structure, how we set up the overall governance structures in Crossrail. Standard looking pyramid here. I think any project professional in the room would agree it's key to have a work breakdown structure, a fixed work breakdown structure, linked to your cost structure, linked to your organisation structure. Only change it under change control, and that's a key element of our controls. So the main building blocks here are contracts in the middle. The contracts are subdivided into work packages and control accounts. The projects roll up into areas, which are groupings of projects by, contracts roll up into projects roll up into areas. The areas are groupings of projects by discipline or by geography. And you can see how that all rolls up to the Crossrail programme and the sponsors at the top. The other thing on this slide is the reporting hierarchy. Excellent reporting is absolutely key. You can see how that rolls up from the contractors' dashboards up through the project dashboards to the board report, 13 of those in the year, and the semi-annual construction report, the 6th monthly report, which is mandated by our sponsors. And we maintained a master database to ensure that this structure was kept in control across all of our systems. There we go. A little bit more detail. Again, this will be a bit hard to read, but this is the Crossrail central teams. You can see the delivery teams in the centre there, supported by the technical team, which is the engineering authority for the programme, and under the finance director, the controls team, the finance team, commercial, land and property, IT, the support team. So a fairly standard looking organisation, I think we would say. How does that work? Day-to-day governance, day-to-day practice. A lot of decision-making obviously happens in meetings. Again, a slightly busy slide, and this may reflect the fact that, in fact, our operational structure probably could have been more efficient than it actually was. The sort of key meetings in the middle there, the Programme Delivery Board is the monthly stewardship meeting to track progress. The Railway Integration Authority, handover of the end-to-end railway, and the Railway Systems and Operations Programme Board will be on track to deliver what the operators want and need once the railway is up and running. These meetings roll up to the Crossrail board at the top, which is a formally constituted board with a strong set of directors and a strong set of non-executive directors with experience in construction and the political sphere. The board itself operates through subcommittees four main subcommittees on there. I've circled the commercial and change subcommittee because we'll talk about that a bit later, but that is the change authority for the programme. Okay. Next slide. So we had to think about the kind of five key, the five key characteristics, if you like, of the Crossrail governance and control system, and we came up with these five key pointers. Strong terms of reference. The CPFR, that stands for Crossrail Programme Functional Requirements, and that is a document which basically sets out the functional requirements, surprise, surprise, that the project will deliver, developed as a response to the requirements of the project development agreement. So those documents form the key baseline of scope. Second principle is delegation of authority, segregation of budget and delegation of authority down through the organisation. Thirdly, effective controls and processes, integrated change and commitment process, review panels and regular forecasting. Progressive assurance, the third line of defence approach. So there's Crossrail's, TfL's internal audit department operates independently of us and challenges and tests our systems. By the same token, Crossrail itself operates a performance assurance process over our contractors, and there is some detail of how that worked, again, on the legacy website. And finally, tools and systems, a strong, robust set of systems with electronic workflow to ensure that the whole governance system ties together. So I'm going to just talk about a little bit more detail about how some of this worked in the next few slides. Firstly, the scope book. This again is very hard to read, but again, have a look at the website. This is a kind of graphical representation of the key contracts in Crossrail, roughly geographical, so you can just about see the line going through the middle there. In our internal systems, if you click on one of these, you go through to the scope book itself, which is a 4 or 5 page summary of the key scope items on each major contract. This is the high-level basis for the design, and it's cascaded to the designers and the contractors. Then there's the baseline of budget, the cost baseline budget. So this was derived from a cost estimate, which was analysed into the work breakdown structure. This was established for the first review point, for the review point 4, which took place in 2011. Now, these review points were established under the project development agreement, and they were basically go, no-go gateways for the sponsors. So review point 4 was the final green light to go and let contracts. The forecast itself was derived from, the forecast risk derived from a QRA, a quantitative risk analysis. Yeah? So rather than just applying an optimism bias approach, the risk was developed by a bottom-up QRA process using the best assessment of the designers and the project managers. This cost baseline establishes a program budget, broken down into a budget at point estimate for each project and each contract within the structure. And was set at a level within the funding. The funding itself was fixed under the project development agreement. And the project development agreement provided for these intervention points, IPs there, 0, 1 and 2. And when the forecast cost, final cost of the project goes through one of these intervention points, the sponsors have the right to take intervention actions, which could ultimately involve taking the organisation over. So the budget was set to remain within those intervention points. That's the budget. So one of the key decisions we took early on was to delegate authority and empowerment down through the organisation. This is just an example of the monetary limits under which managers and committees in the organisation were working. These delegations are backed up by systems of change control and reporting, so the volume and value of change is visible right through the organisation. It's often a difficult decision as to how much to delegate down in a major project. But for me, as long as you have control systems which are adequate to know what's going on, you can have the confidence to delegate down through the organisation. These contingency budgets were disaggregated down to those levels at which authority was delegated. So the total budget, total contingency budget, is basically the difference between the bottom-up estimate, the cost estimate, and the total funding. That established the total contingency. Part of that contingency then delegated down to sectors and to projects. This was on the basis of a risk matrix, which establishes which kind of risks, which risks should be managed at which level of the organisation. And the contingency was disaggregated down to them to fund the risks allocated at each level. And part of this is a continual monitoring of outturn cost and outturn risk via the QRA process. So you're comparing your cost to go and your risk to go to your level of contingency at each stage in the project. And one of the benefits of this is that the project manager himself or herself has a limited budget to work with. So if issues which are identified by him or her, which are program level issues, which need to be escalated, he or she is incentivized to raise those issues up through program change with a request for funding. Okay. A little bit about systems. I think there are people here who can sell you most of these, if you're interested. Very little customization of the systems took place. The one thing we did customize was the data warehouse at the top there, which sucked in the data from the systems and spat it out for reporting purposes. These all work pretty well now, but it took us a good two years to get there. Don't underestimate the time in setting up a new project to get these systems up and working. Just to highlight a couple of points on there, we've got the Bentley systems, which included ProjectWise for scope control, and Enterprise Bridge, which is a document management system, and also runs a contract administration system, EBCA, and that manages all of the communications under the NEC3 contract, which was the main contract suite that we used. At the left, as you look at it, is the Prism cost management system. We have people from Aries here, might even be in the audience. So that Prism worked very well for us. It was customized to introduce a change control module, which captures change by what are called trends. These capture AFC changes and budget changes, allow those changes to be categorized for audit purposes, and the authorization of those is controlled through the system by electronic workflow. And for me, that was a really key underpinning of our change control and cost control process. So, pause for a drink, and then we're going to talk about some engineering, a little bit about some concrete examples. And there is quite a lot of concrete involved in these examples, I can tell you. I was expecting to get the big screen here. Tech Zone, they've got a massive screen right up on the wall. I think if this was on that screen, you'd see it a bit better. But this is a long section through Crossrail from Royal Oak Portal at one end to Victoria Dock Portal at the other end. That's a station there, Ticket Hall at either end, two platforms 250 metres long, slightly over that in most cases, 21 kilometres of tunnels, two tunnels going eastbound and westbound. I want to talk about a change that had some consequences, some that were foreseen and some that were not foreseen. This is about the deletion of some shafts. That's a picture of a shaft being built. That's actually at Fisher Street, which is just around the back of Holborn. You wouldn't know it was there if you don't know Fisher Street. It's a little alleyway around the back of Holborn. I'm going to talk about the shafts. I'm going to talk about platform edge doors. So you've got a drawing of some platform edge doors there and the screens above. And at that bottom left, you've got what they looked like a couple of months ago, just in the process of being built. So, when Crossrail was originally designed, there were no less than 13 ventilation shafts which were designed along the route. These provide passenger access and egress during emergencies, and they're important for the control of airflow through the tunnel, and they're also there to control and allow smoke to escape in the event of a fire. They're big. This is the biggest one. This is the shaft at the Limo Peninsula on Docklands, just down the corner from Canning Town. And that's actually a picture from 2011 of the tunnel boring machines being lowered down that shaft. So you can see the size of that sort of thing. And you can imagine the construction difficulty and inconvenience of trying to build 13 of those in the centre of London. So in 2009, the engineers asked themselves the question, do we really need these? Do we need 13 shafts? Is there a smarter way of doing it? And the answer was yes. We're pleased to know there was a smarter way of doing it. So we took out 8 of the shafts. Cost reduction and a significant saving in disturbance to the City of London trying to build these things, and a lot less requirement to purchase property, knock down buildings. And clearly a safety benefit to those who have to construct them and to the public around the construction sites. Okay, so the consequences of that. These are the shafts that remain. Fisher Street, Stepney Green, Mile End, Elmland Street, and that large one at Limo. So talking a bit about consequences then. The major known consequence of this was the was the need to seal the edge of the platforms because the shafts allow the air displaced by the train to escape. With fewer shafts, that airflow, the piston effect is much stronger and could be a hazard to people standing on the platform. So most underground railways, you can see the Jubilee line at the top left there. If you look at the top of their platform edge doors, there's a gap. There's a gap above the doors. In Crossrail, we had to fill that gap with these platform edge screens. So the design of those screens presented a number of challenges. They aren't just barriers, they include ducting and services behind them. This is innovative engineering. There are a few examples of this engineering elsewhere in the world. The design took longer than we intended. Oops, sorry, I'm going to go back there. I was trying to go down the notes, and of course I went down the next slide. The design took longer to complete than we wanted to. There were complex issues of interface between the design of the screens and the station itself, and it was realised that the screens were in fact too heavy to hang from the roof of the platform and had to be propped up from the bottom of the platform. This was a change that was introduced after the contracts were let. So any change like that in the midst of construction after letting of contracts is going to cause cost and delay. And it's fair to say that the contractors didn't really understand the impact of these screens on the civil's construction when they were bidding for the contracts. So we knew about the requirement for the screens, we knew about the higher airflows. What we didn't realise was that higher airflows mean bigger fans. Bigger fans, you have to have a more robust structure within the shafts to support the fans. So that was an unrealised consequence of the change. These bigger fans are more noisy, so you need more noise insulation to protect neighbours of the shafts and the stations. And the final change, unexpected change, really was only realised in the last few months, which is that to let passengers escape from the remaining shafts, you have to upgrade the interior of the shaft so it's suitable for public access. So the lessons that we took from that was that there's always a balance between designing a system centrally and cascading it to your separate contractors and disaggregating that design to the individual contractors. Any kind of central set of designs you want to give to a number of contractors, you need to test as thoroughly as you possibly can before you hand it out to them. And that testing should try and involve as many engineering disciplines as possible. I think where we got this wrong, the civil engineers looked at it, but we should have had a closer involvement of M&E engineers, acoustic engineers, and indeed the safety authorities. Second example. Again, you might not be able to see these quite as well as I wanted to. This is the Connaught Tunnel. So the Crossrail route runs under the Royal Docks on the way to Woolwich. You can see that it's the red line in the photo on the top there. Early in the programme, decision was taken to use the existing Connaught Tunnel. That's the two photos at the top. That had been there since the 1870s. It was built to carry the North London line under the docks. It survived bombing during the Second World War, and it was in use until about 2006, although obviously it was in a bit of a bad state by then. So this seemed like a really good decision at the time. It's much cheaper to use an existing tunnel than bore a new one. It was going to be about a quarter of the cost. The plan was to fill this existing tunnel with foam concrete and rebore it. Fairly shortly after the contract was let, a bathymetric survey was undertaken of the docks. That made us realise that the dock bed underneath just above the tunnel was a lot thinner than we thought, and trying to bore underneath it risked what the surveyor described as catastrophic inundation, i.e. the dock draining out, most of Silvertown being flooded, and the Royal Docks collapsing. So that was obviously something we wanted to avoid if we possibly could. So major rethink. The contracts had been let by this stage. Contractor and Crossrail went back to the design and developed a solution involving building a cofferdam, just about see that at the bottom right there, to enable that bit of the dock to be drained and a concrete box to be built to strengthen the tunnel. A number of engineering challenges to be undertaken or to be got round, if you like. One was the need not to preserve access to the Excel Centre by water as quickly as possible, or for as long as possible. So that had to be a very quick job. And the other challenge was we couldn't use cranes because, as you can just about see in that picture, it's right on the flight path to the city airport. So a complete reworking of the design in the middle of the contract. Fortunately, both Crossrail and the contractor had enough contractual flexibility to work through an optimised contractor involvement process to recast the design. So I had a discussion with the project manager about this, and her view was that there were sort of five, it's a rule of five in this presentation, five key success factors: a collaborative approach between the contractor and Crossrail, supported by a focus on values. Transparency between the client and contractor in cost terms and in engineering terms, and this was underpinned by co-location of the project manager and the contractor teams. A continuing focus on good process. Don't throw away the contract just because the design is changing. Planning for early completion. The initial plans for this tunnel involved completing it before it was necessary for the full Crossrail route, and in terms of in practice, that float was in fact fully utilised. And then finally, sourcing the world-class engineering expertise in the relevant disciplines. So the tunnel is now open, it's now up and running, and test trains, I'm pleased to say, are going through the tunnel as we speak, actually. So a little bit more then about structure and governance and the decision-making process. A few pointers about how we manage change in Crossrail. This is a summary of the financial change control process. So we made a distinction between the full performance budget, which is the basis for the planned value, for earned value, and the sanction to spend. So you can have two separate budgets. A project which is overspending might have a higher sanction to spend, but you'll leave its performance budget as it is. So when you run your earned value statistics, those who are familiar with CPI, that project would have a CPI less than 1. And this avoids the problem of the CPI being reset to 1 every time you increase the sanction to spend. Changes typically progress from a risk through the resolution of a trend in the PRISM system to the implementation of a change. Management approval and financial authority are controlled through the trend process in the PRISM cost management system. Forecast outturn cost is changed by the trend process, and trends are categorised by cause, so we have an audit trail of the causes of change. Budgets also changed again through this change process under delegated authority. And the investment authority, the sanction to spend, is reserved to the board subcommittee, the change control authority. And finally there, the contract manager's authority to implement changes to the target price under the NEC contract. His internal authority comes from the resolution of a trend in the cost system. So there's one set of authorities. And of course, the project managers have authority under the contract to decide entitlement subject to their duty of confidentiality. Key pillars of successful change control. It's another 5, I'm afraid. I don't know if I've got all the 5s in this presentation. Clear baseline. A baseline of scope and budget, which you don't change except under change control. A work breakdown structure maintained by a master data system to ensure that all changes to the structure are mirrored across all of your systems. Delegation of authority and delegation of contingency within a controlled framework. Use of IT systems to capture change to cost and to budgets, and to control and authorise changes under delegation of authority. And finally, a single approval body with change to scope and budget established with senior management buy-in. And this change authority was a subcommittee of the Crossrail board. This slide talks a little bit about the process by which changes went through that authority. This is really standard, be very familiar to anybody who knows about the APM process or the Prince2 process. Very standard change capture and authorization process. So you start by capturing changes in the cost management system. You take a decision on whether that change is a project-funded change or a program-funded change. If it's project-funded, it's delegated down to the delivery teams to manage out of their contingency. If it's a program change, you capture it on a standard template. This captures the business case and the impacts on cost, time, quality, and safety. There's then a review process to ensure that the relevant stakeholders and the relevant experts have been through it, validated it, before it gets to the change body, the change authorization body, which is that commercial and change subcommittee of the board. That decision is taken at that committee, and if it's over a certain value, it might be referred up to the full board. And of course, the final step is communication of the change and recording of the change. We run a separate change log, obviously, but we record the change and the budget changes in the cost management system. So everything is recorded in the one system. And there's any scope change goes to the doors system, which records scope, and it changes to the baseline scope book. Okay. What sort of volume of change did we suffer? Well, quite a high volume of change. Something like 20,000 compensation events under the NEC3 contract in the last 6 or 7 years. A value of about 3 billion, so quite significant. Obviously, not all of those go through the program change process I've just described. There were about 700 program changes in that 6-year period, which basically involved rolling up all those compensation events into larger chunks of change. So, wrapping up really in the final few minutes, what do we think went well in terms of change and Crossrail and change governance? I've talked about the establishment of a baseline early. Baseline for scope, baseline for cost, baseline for schedule, to provide a basis for the management of change. I've mentioned the fact that there was a formal sponsored change process, which underpinned a supportive relationship between the project and the sponsors, which so far we still maintain today. A work breakdown structure linked to the cost breakdown structure, and backed up by the use of a master data system, which ensures that structure is maintained across all the systems in the program. A single program change process, structured and brought into by the directors. Allocation of risk to appropriate levels of the organisation and delegation of contingency to those levels. Early capture of change by these cost systems. Formal change control to forecasts and budgets, again in those cost systems, the trend process and PRISM, which records the reasons for the changes and authorises them. And finally, a continual review of risk through the QRA and comparison of risk and to the risk to go, to the contingency to go, and the budget authority. So that all sounds quite good. It wasn't all roses. Things we could have done better. Level at which the control design changed. The baseline documents were at quite a high level. So that reduces how much change control administration you have to do, but it does mean that there's a possibility of quite a lot of design churn at the lower level in the organisation. And at times, program change was catching up on that and authorising change effectively after it had happened. So for me, a recommendation for future projects would be try to capture and evaluate design changes at the time of the issue of those designs. Try to identify the cause and the cost, and indeed the contractual impact at the time that the drawing is issued. Quite a big job that, and would require use of highly sophisticated design change logs. So you need to try and get on the front foot, try not to be a retrospective budget allocation process, and at times I think that was a trap that we fell into. Key to this for me is us as control staff. It's having control staff that are embedded in the projects, understand what's going on, and are in touch with the work at the coalface. And that's always what we've tried to do with varying degrees of success in Crossrail. So did we succeed overall in controlling change? There has been little major change to design. What we're building now is essentially what was designed at the start. There has, however, been quite a high volume of what I would call churn, design change at the lower level. Some of our contracts were let before the civils design was fully complete. That's always going to be a fertile source of contract change. There were a few major sponsor changes. There has been quite a lot of self-imposed change in the schedule, and particularly, guess what, at interfaces between contracts. If anyone's got an answer to that, I'd be interested to know it. Contingency budgets were established at the start and have been substantially utilised in many cases. But we remain on track, and in just over a year's time, that central section tunnel will be opening from Paddington down to Canary Wharf and Abbey Wood, and that first train will be running. Exciting stuff. Now, if I can get the IT working, I have a small
Hi, Andy Newton here. I've worked for one of the design organisations on Crossrail and have been sort of on the receiving end of a lot of the change. I was wondering how you're feeding that sort of knowledge and the lessons learned back into programmes like HS2. Hopefully you are.
Yes. Yeah, we spent a lot of time with HS2 and with a number of other public sector bodies. We had the MOD Defence Procurement Organisation in just yesterday. I'm going to throw it back to you in a minute. I'm not sure to what extent the change has been driven by how much of it's come from design and how much has come top down. I think most of it's been about how you build the thing rather than trying to build something different. But a lot of this information is on the legacy site, so we're trying to share the lessons that way. A number of people have moved over from Crossrail to HS2, and a number of them are also hopefully moving into Crossrail 2 as well, which is now in design within TfL. What's your take on the cause of design change?
I think on the project we've had approximately 600 instructions that have come top down from either from the contractor or from Crossrail itself, and that's probably mirrored about changes that we've instigated. Yeah. I definitely back up your comment about more resource. Some of the lagging sort of change control, we're sort of 18 months behind at the moment, and it's really just your comment about it's a reallocation of budget.
Yeah,
I concur with that. That's very much the case. And in some regards, down at the lower level, the project controls aspects have become very much a contract justification exercise rather than a control and forecasting exercise.
Do you think there's a way of running something like a design change log that we could try to capture that stuff before it hits the design?
Yeah, I'm sure that would help in some ways. I think my initial view would be that the issue of resource, that there weren't just enough people all the way up the contractual chain managing that change process on a regular basis, and then therefore it came up sort of backed up until there was a big sweep up exercise where they all got swept up together, and then we started it. Everything was re-baseline and we started again. It didn't really follow the full NEC contract, trying to understand changes and impact them into the cost and the programme on a regular basis.
Yes, I think that's right. The NEC is designed to try to capture change and risk prospectively, isn't it? And it's a great idea, but it's so hard to do that on a massive programme.
I completely agree. And the volume of changes just makes it almost impossible to pull one change out against the other, because they all impact on one another.
And bear in mind that this is sorry, I'll let you go, but this is a project that actually fundamentally didn't change. We're still building the same things as I said that we're going to build at the start, but you still seem to get a massive amount of cost difference all the way through. Thank you very much for your attention. I think it's time for me to hand back to the next speaker.